Okay, here we are. What is the date today? It's July 25th, 2025. And I have with me today a friend that I've known for many years, Robbie Roberts. Robbie, would you like to introduce yourself and we can have a conversation?
I'd love to, buddy. First of all, good morning. Thank you for having me. I'm just delighted to spend some time with you. It's always fun to hang with Ron Kimura. Um, Good morning. I'm Robbie Roberts. I am, gosh, do I need you want a bio or what are you you'll ask the questions, but good morning, everybody. I'm Robbie.
Well, let me kind of lay out what our hopes are that we want to touch on. We spoke originally about the difference between inheritance and legacy, uh,
Correct.
and that definition by our conversation is inheritance is what we give to someone in terms of money, houses, stuff, whereas legacy is what we leave in someone. And our hope today is to provide a legacy, an idea of who Robbie Roberts is, what his past, his present, and his hopes for the future are. So, from that context, that's kind of the goal of our conversation today is to get kind of insight into who this guy is and how he's lived his life and what his whole family situation is. So maybe you could start by talking about where were you born and raised and that sort of thing, Robbie.
That's wonderful. Now I'm looking forward to it when we first talked about this and the difference between inheritance and legacy is just really it's beautiful. I appreciate you having me on to do this. So I was born in Cleveland, Ohio, raised in a small little town on the east side of Cleveland called Shaker Heights. Mom and dad were wonderful people. Gay Roberts and Alan Roberts. I have three siblings. Cindy's the oldest. I'm next. By the way, I'm Alan Jr. actually. Robbie's been a nickname I've had literally since day one. Um, my brother Andy, and then my sister Amy. Amy lives in Columbus. She just had her first grandchild. Andy lives in Columbus, and Cindy lives in Akron and has a little beach or a cottage up on a lake near Sandusky that she spends most of her summers in. She's widowed, and so that's kind of where I was, kind of raised, and a little bit about me there. Um, and
What do you remember about your earliest years growing up? You're the second. Uh, Cindy was the oldest. How many years apart are you and Cindy?
Cindy and I are, gosh, we're 3 or 3.5 years apart. We're 3 years, 3 years and a few months apart. What I remember most about where I grew up was really what it was almost idyllic in the sense that growing up in a Midwestern town or suburb in the 1950s and 60s was like our doors were never locked. The rules were as if you left the house in the afternoon or the morning, whenever you left, that had to be home by dinner. If you went out after dinner, you had to be home when the street lights came on. It was just really a safe, wonderful place to be a kid. I rode my bike literally everywhere. I remember I forget which kind of bike I drove when I was a younger teenager, but I remember it was like 12 or 13 when I was a younger kid, not a younger teenager. But I remember getting my first real bike. I had a Schwinn Continental. I mean, that thing could fly, and I rode all over town, and it was wonderful, and just really being a safe place to be. That's what I really remember most is I was just raised in a loving, and we can peel this back a little bit. There was definitely my parents. Were not perfect parents, but I never felt the absence of love. I always felt loved by them. And my both my parent my both my parents came from alcoholic homes. My dad was definitely an alcoholic. Not sure if my mom was or not, but my dad died in 1990, and my mom died on the exact same day that my dad died
Wow.
in 2016. So they died 26 years apart to the day.
Wow. What was your mom's name again?
Gay Draper was her
Gay.
mate. Gay
Uh,
Roberts.
uh-huh. And so did you remember your grandparents? They're your parents'
I,
parents?
I remember my mom's parents really, really well. They were very, very active in our life. We were there a lot. My grandmother on my dad's side died when I was relatively young. I want to say when I was maybe 5, 6, or 7. My dad's father, Harris, was a wonderful guy. He hung with us in the summers and lived in Florida in the winters. He died when I was probably 12 or 13. So I have very clear, fond, vivid memories of my dad's dad
Hmm.
and both my mom's parents.
Hmm. Did you have a good, it sounds like you had a good relationship with them. Were they influential in in teaching you about life and values and all of those things?
I would say less about life and just more about like life values, more about particularly with my dad's dad. I remember as a young man. So we talk about life values. I remember going to the racetrack with him. I remember going to Cleveland Indians baseball games. He was an Indians baseball fan, but he was also became a fan of the Minnesota Twins because where he lived in Florida, the Twins trained there. So I would go, I went, remember going to see Harmon Killebrew and Rod Carew and all the great Twins back in the day. And
What year were you born, Robbie?
I was born in 56.
56.
Yeah.
Wow. 1956. What was going on in the world in 1956?
Oh my goodness. I don't remember. I have never really gone back and like wondered what was going on historically. I can give you some sports references, but not much. Can't really pinpoint. It's kind of embarrassing almost. I don't know what's going on in 56. I'm gonna take a little drink of my coffee, Ron.
What kind of career did your folks have?
My mom was a stay-at-home mom in those days. Not many parents, not many moms worked outside of the house. My dad was a stockbroker and worked for Merrill Lynch and Payne Weber, and that's what he did until literally the day he died.
Well, Shaker Heights is from what I understand, is a pretty high-end suburb of Cleveland. Is that your recollection?
Yes, although it's interesting growing up there, like I didn't quite understand the opportunities or the wealth that was there. Although the truth is that Shaker Heights was really divided into like 3 or 4 different little communities. There's actually 9 different elementary schools and
Oh,
2 junior highs. But the um, the thing there is there was definitely some wealth, but there was also some really what I'm gonna use it. There was definitely a middle class to it. Like Shaker Heights was it was but certainly there was great schools and safe neighborhoods and nice homes and certainly I'm probably underselling the wealth that was there. I guess my recollection of growing up there is that I guess I didn't view myself as a rich kid, if you will.
well, those early years are so impressionable. Our grade school and high school days. Do you have memories of those grade school and high school days in terms of the friends you made and whether you had kind of a father knows best kind of family life where you got together for dinner every night and that sort of thing?
For sure. So I have very, very fond and vivid memories of my elementary school situation and my junior high situation. We actually moved after my ninth grade year to a different town and moved a little bit further east and didn't go to Shaker Heights High School. My sister did, but my brother and I and my younger sister went to a different high school. But the um, the memories I have, probably one of the most vivid memories was is that the boundary line of our property was literally the first baseline for the elementary school um, baseball field that was just a black top area. And so I just remember like literally we were our my side and backyard were the hub of the neighborhood. My
Mm,
mom every single year, the final day of school, it was probably 300, 400 kids in the elementary school. She'd have them all over on the playground in our backyard, and she'd give everybody
wow.
popsicles. I remember
Wow.
I ran into a young man, a guy who's probably 65 at a high school in a middle school sporting event at Pacific Ridge in Carlsbad, and we connected that we were who I was, and his name was Jeremy Gottlieb, and Jeremy it was like one of those moments we hadn't seen each other in 50 years. And he
Wow.
said, I remember your mom passing out popsicles the last day of school, and it was really cool. So
That is that is great.
yeah. And
So when you were in high school, your sister, let's say if you were 3 years apart, you would have been like a freshman and she would have been a senior sort of thing.
actually, I was in eighth grade when she was a senior. So the way our birthdays were is that I was never in high school when she was there. So
Mm,
she went. So when she, I was in eighth grade when she. No, I was in ninth grade when she was a senior. But back then, that's right. Is Shaker had their middle school, their junior high was 7, 8, 9, and the high school was 10, 11, 12.
mm.
So I was in ninth grade when she was a senior, but we weren't at the same school. And then
So
we,
were your other siblings in high school or any time you were together, where your reputation preceded you with Andy and Amy? Were they in high school while you were still there, or was that you had
yep.
gone?
So Amy was probably 7, 8 years younger than me, so we were never in the same
Ah,
school together. But when I was a senior, Andy was a sophomore. And so when Andy was a freshman, I was a junior. So we were in high school 2 years together.
so were you an active, popular kid in high school? What was your reputation? What was the Robbie Roberts of what class did you graduate from then?
1975,
1975. So, gee, you're coming up. Is that the 50th?
which is Saturday night. Yep. And
Saturday night. Wow.
and I am not attending, unfortunately.
You're not attending. So,
No,
what was your reputation like? Were you a popular kid, athletic kid, a brain child, a geek? What was your reputation?
well, it definitely wasn't a brainchild. Do you want me to answer this honestly, or
Well, this is for your legacy now.
that's true? Well, so the honest answer is I was a popular kid. I was somewhat athletic, but I was also, let's just say, I didn't, I pushed the boundaries on making good choices. So it was the 1970s. There was lots of opportunity to put certain things in your body that maybe you shouldn't, and I definitely I took advantage of that. And this is probably not a bad time to broach the subject, but I started abusing drugs and alcohol by the time I was 16, and so I got sober when I was 28. It
Well,
was
there's a story there,
oh, there's
that
depth.
is part of your legacy that I think it's important for, your kids and your grandkids and great grandkids. They all are going to have curiosity if they
No,
don't
for
already. Who is
yeah,
this guy?
exactly. And my kids and obviously my wife know everything that I'm an open book to them, and at some point in time, I'll be an open book to my grandkids. But yeah, I made some bad choices when I was a teenager, and that's part of my testimony. It's part of my legacy is that but I think the beautiful part of it, there's definitely redemption. There's a redemptive story in there, and
Absolutely.
that's that. I mean, we can peel back as many layers as you want, but that's kind of that's it, and that's the surface level explanation.
Well, how did you get involved in, because I know we've golfed together and you're a great golfer. When did you discover the athletic skills that you have?
So hold on. Somebody's calling me. I'm sorry to do this, but hey, everybody, I'm doing this on a phone. We'll figure this out.
Let me put it on pause here for a second. Okay, so your athletic ability, when did you discover that?
Well, first of all, I'm gonna quote a dear friend of mine, Dean Acosta, and we would always say, Dean's a local San Diego guy. When a kid would do well on the little league field or on the high school sports field, Dean would say something regarding, "Hey, my theory about talent and kids." I mean, what's that? And I'd tee it up. He'd say, "Well, true talent skips a generation." So, so most people got the joke. Some people didn't think it was funny, but all that to say is that my dad was a really good high school athlete, ended up playing football at Brown, and was Joe Paterno's backup in college for 2 years
Wow,
at Brown.
wow,
And my uncle played 1 or 2 years at the University of Michigan. Played in the same backfield with Tommy Harmon and Forrest Evashevsky. And Tommy
wow.
Harmon won the Heisman in late 30s, early 40s, something like that. So I was a decent athlete, but I was not as good an athlete as my uncle or my dad. And my kids have far exceeded my athletic ability. My older son Cal's almost a scratch golfer, was a really good high school baseball player, just as a good athlete, played rugby in college. And then my younger son Carter lettered in 4 different sports at Santa Fe Christian, was the high school quarterback, went on and played Division III football at Wheaton. So clearly, the Dean's joke is not a joke. It's true that the athleticism in my family skipped me. But I'm guess I'm trying to be humble. But I was a decent athlete. But I wasn't great at anything. But just I was a sportsman in the fact that I just love competition. I love whether it's softball, baseball, golf, flag football, touch football, whatever it is. I played it as a young adult, and I did play um, football, basketball, and baseball in high school. But I just was never great. I was just okay.
What was your passion when you were in high school and when you were in college age? What did you enjoy doing? Is it something you would want to talk about?
I just think that's a great out. So some of my passions I shouldn't talk about, but I never lost my passion for participating in sports, even when I was putting stuff in my body I shouldn't have. But also a sports fan of Ohio State Buckeyes, Cleveland Browns, Cleveland Indians, Cleveland Cavaliers. I'm all Cleveland, all Ohio sports. And by the way, just for the record, anybody that's listening, the Indians are still the Indians. They're not. The management is named something else, and this isn't a pro Donald Trump. I don't know if you saw recently, but he came out and said something about the Indians should go back to the Indians, no longer be the Guardians. But I'm an Indians fan. I was raised an Indians fan, and so that was my real passion as a kid and as a young adult was just Cleveland sports. And
Well, when you had those in those years you talked about when you were 20, and is that when you got a hold of your addictions and that area of life? And how did that transpire? Were you influenced by somebody, or what's the backstory there?
the backstory is this: so I was 28 years old, I believe. I'm doing the math right, in 1984. I was born in 56. Yeah, I was 28 years old, and I was dating a woman who later became my wife. Her name was Susan Light. And we were married for 3 years and then parted ways. Susan was a wonderful, caring person, but she saw what path I was on, and basically her and my sister Cindy basically, I'm not gonna say conspired, but basically we're talking, hey, Robbie's got to get a handle on this. And basically Susan urged me to go see this woman who was really just a therapist. And long story short, this therapist, whose name I cannot remember, but she was wonderful. She was bright. She was caring. And basically, about the fourth or fifth meeting of doing this therapy session, she said, listen, you got a drug and alcohol problem, pal. And I got a bed for you lined up at this place called the Rosary Hall,
Mm,
which is which was a hospital in Cleveland that is actually mentioned in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous.
mm.
And I went in there on, give me a second, bud. I'm getting
Mm.
emotional. Can we stop for a minute?
So you had a conversation with this therapist that kind of demonstrated or gave you a reflection of what was going on. That's a lesson that I think is something that you can pass on as part of your legacy because, addiction is, there's the question of nature and nurture. And it sounds like the addiction part might have been in your genetics. And is there a lesson that you could pass on to your children and your grandchildren as to how you confronted it and didn't run away from it? Is maybe you could talk a little bit about what lessons you've learned from that experience.
So first of all, I appreciate you, Ron, and as somebody, but Ron and I were just talking offline for a second as we stopped this, and for me to gather my composure, if you will, is that I feel really safe with Ron, and it's really important to have these discussions. But I think the lesson that I learned is that um, so much of what I dealt with as a teenager was just stuff that I didn't deal with. So I'm saying I dealt with it, but I really didn't deal with it. And so all these emotions were being stuffed, and that the use of whether it's smoking marijuana or doing other harder drugs or drinking or whatever, it's meant to suppress those feelings. There's a lot of times early on in AA, I heard that my problem wasn't drugs or alcohol. My problem was Robbie and how I processed information, and that drugs and alcohol became my solution.
Mhm.
So I'm the problem, and I say that in a loving way. Like I'm the problem with the way that I process information. I think my father was the exact same way. So I think both of my kids are pretty healthy kids. I'm not saying they're perfect, but they've um, and by the way, I don't mind sharing this, and Amy wouldn't mind, but Amy's father, who just died a couple of years ago, he was a pretty bad alcoholic as well. So Amy and I have that in our genes. We literally, we've never, like, there's no alcohol in our house. Like every once in a while, like somebody will come over and they'll bring a 6 pack and they'll drink a beer, which is fine. But we just never kept alcohol in the house. And not that we hid it from our kids. Our kids knew early on. By the time they were, I would say, teenagers, they were aware of that dad went to AA meetings and why dad doesn't drink. And we peeled back layers of the onion as the kids have gotten older. But I guess my advice would be to anybody, particularly to my kids and my grandkids, is like, don't stuff your feelings. Like let it out, talk to somebody. And some point in time in this conversation, I'm sure we're going to talk about our faith, but um, my faith in Jesus has been instrumental in me um, uh, dealing with the stuff that life has thrown our way, whether it's work difficulties or family difficulties or financial difficulties. It's not stuffing things. It's communicating, asking for help, and in my case, ultimately leaning on Jesus for the things that I just struggle with. And I'm still at I'll be 69 on Monday, Ron, and I still have stuff that I deal with. I got physical ailments, I got mental junk and stuff, and I'm working on it today, even as a young 69-year-old guy.
Well,
So,
the issue of suffering is something that if one hasn't gone through suffering, they haven't been around long enough. Grief, loss, failure, suffering, it's in that category. And there's a book which you may have read, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning.
mhm.
And he talks about being worthy of suffering. And it's counterintuitive in that most people want to run away from suffering. It sounds like in your case, you became worthy of your suffering because you confronted it, you surrendered to it, you accepted it, and you found your faith. And that's a subject of faith, hope, and love that we could uh, maybe get into as well. Let's maybe come to the present time. We talked about the past, and so the present, you're going to be 69 on Monday. Happy birthday
Thank you, buddy.
ahead of time. What's your what's your hope for the coming years as you navigate the realization that you are getting older? What's your what's your vision for and your dreams for the coming years?
Well, it's interesting. We had a little meeting with Cal and Laurel, our oldest son, and his wife last night. We had dinner with them, and we just had somewhat of a casual conversation. And one of our dreams is to specifically, this is a very specific dream, is to I'm going to put a phrase. We want to build some sort of a compound. We want to live together, all three families.
Hmm.
Cal and his wife Laurel and their three kids, and Carter and his wife Kate and their pending child, who's now 3.5 months in Kate's body. Is a unborn child at the present time, so we're excited to have our fourth grandkid coming. But our hopes and dreams are to really just, and whether we're living together on the same property, we all, Cal and Laura live a mile from us, and Kate and Carter live 8 miles from us, so we're very close together. But our dreams are simple, and that's to stay together and close as a family as possible, and to spend as much time with our grandkids as humanly possible over the next how much time we have left on this earth. And so that's primarily it. And then I guess the other thing is just our relationship with our community, our church community, our friends, which is all rooted in our faith, which is, we haven't taken a deep dive into it, but Ron and I, we share that same, I'm a born again Christian, and I was saved in 1998 through a group of guys that Ron knows well, and Scott Lynn was kind of the spear of that, the tip of the spear, if you will, that helped enter me into that relationship with Jesus, which started in October of 1998. But
Let's talk a little bit about that just for a moment because it sounds like it's a foundational aspect of your life and therefore your legacy. Talk about how that transpired. What's the backstory with how you happened to meet Scott and tell a little bit about that story, Robbie.
So I'm gonna give me 1 second. You don't have to got a buddy calling me. I'm doing this on the phone, so I apologize to all four of the people that'll watch this video that is a little choppy. Um, so in 1995 or six, a buddy of mine, Jim Barone, asked me to join a fantasy football league that was run by our dear friend Scott Lynn. And unbeknownst to me and Jim and a handful of other guys in that group, that three or four of the members of the league, including Ron Kimura, Bruce Howe, I don't remember who else was in the league, but were believers. And there were some of us that weren't. And so it was Scott's hope that at some point in time that the non-believing members of the league would ask the question, what's this all about? And because what Scott would not beat us over the head with scripture, but he'd write a Monday morning newsletter. Do you remember those newsletters that
Hmm.
he'd write? This was pre-internet on fantasy football. This was everything was done with scoring on Monday and uh, with the give me 1 more second. I'm going to step outside for a second, Ronnie. My my mother-in-law lives with us, which is a blessing, and she just came back from a morning walk, and she's going to be in the kitchen for a little bit, which is where I was. So I'm going to come out on the back patio.
Okay.
All right, sorry about that.
No,
So,
no worries.
and this is so distracting. Everybody's texting me, and I apologize. Gosh, I'm not sure how. Can we pause it for a second?
So Scott, in his weekly blurb, I have to give you a kind of an aside because was Pat Sullivan in the league when you were in the league?
He was not.
Pat Sullivan is the guy that we really started the league with, and he rented space from Scott and I, and he had the foulest mouth. He just was that kind of a person. He loved his Irish heritage and after about I don't know a year of his renting space with us, he said, "How come you guys don't swear?" And personally, I never even thought of it. It's just that's not the kind of thing that you even think about. One way, well, I guess you're aware of if somebody does swear, but I wasn't aware that I didn't swear. So anyway, we kind of gave him our answer about our faith and so forth. And over a period of, I don't know, 6 months, a year, Pat actually stopped swearing.
That's beautiful.
Anyway, so with respect to Scott, then how did that transpire with you? How did that wash
So
with you?
Scott, if you as you probably know well, Scott was a part of a group of guys that would bring in speakers, and we would do a luncheon at typically at a San Diego, probably a Mission Valley hotel.
Hmm.
Scott would do it and put it on, and he would have everybody encourage everybody to invite at least one non-believer through the business world. And Scott had been inviting me like for two or three different sessions. I was at a stage in my career where I was working pretty hard. I was selling insurance, trying to build a book, and we had about three or four meetings in a row. So this would be over the course of maybe a year or so where I couldn't go because my schedule just wouldn't allow it. So there was I want to say it was October 5th or 6th of 1998. And Scott had told me that Rosie Greer was going to come speak. And I knew who Rosie Greer was because
Hmm.
he was obviously a famous football player. And when I was a kid, like Rosie played for the Rams. He was a big guy. I say a big guy. He was physically a big guy, but he was a well-known athlete. So I'm gonna redirect conversation for 1 second as I walk back inside to grab something to drink because now my mouth is getting dry. I apologize for all this, but people will understand my that know me that I'm a bunch of interruptions. So anyhow, um, I had a safety meeting that day up in Knott's Berry Farm that I told Scott I could not make it to. And this was a standing meeting that I went to once a month where I ran the meeting as their insurance broker. And that day, the cell phones were just starting to happen. I had a cell phone, I think, in my car, maybe one of those that was bolted to the car. And my phone rang. It was my assistant. She said, "Hey, listen, the safety meeting at such and such a company's canceled. Why don't you head on back?" And I was somewhere in Orange County. I turned the car around and I called Scott up and I said, "Hey, Scott, I know you're having your lunch in the day. I'm really interested in coming. My safety meeting was canceled. I think I can get there in time. Is there still a spot for me?" Scott said, "Sure, come on down." So I'm going to get into a little bit of detail because this is really when I was saved, Ron. I mean, you know the story, you've heard it before. Um, so I walk into luncheon, a lot of guys I know, we sit down, we start getting our rubber chicken or whatever they were serving us. And I'm not sure, maybe it was Skip Shantz, it was Ned Banning, got up, introduced Rosie. Rosie starts speaking. And I'm not exaggerating when I tell you, and I'm going to get emotional here, that when he started speaking, you've heard people say this, like the room got really quiet 5, 7, 8 minutes, 5, 6, 7 minutes into it. And I felt like Rosie was literally speaking to me. He started talking about things. The one thing that resonated with me was he had this like a really strong fear of death. And I related to that. And then it's back to my issues as a kid. And I never really I unwrapped it a little bit, but we didn't have to go way into it. But I had a tremendous fear of death as a kid. And so I related to that. Rosie had 2 or 3 things other that I related to. And anyhow, it was a great talk. Afterwards, a lot of these things, there's a line of people that are there to thank the speaker. In this case, they're thanking Rosie. There's 30 people in line. So there's 15 people in front of me, 15 people are behind me. And by the time I get there, I just said, "Hey, I just want to thank you. I'm really related to a few of the things you said. Just thanks." And like the 5 or 6 people in front of me, like they just moved on. And Rosie said, "Hey, do you have a second?" I was like, "Well, sure." And we left the line and went over to an empty table that was 10 feet to the right or left of where we were standing. And he said, "I got to ask you a question. Do you have a relationship with Jesus Christ?" And of course, being the good salesman I am, I always controlled the conversation. I started to define what he was talking about, and I was kind of like starting to ramble a little bit. And he grabbed my arm, and I mean, his hand was bigger than my entire forearm. He puts his hand on my arm and says, "Hey, the question requires a yes or no response." It was like, wow, what a close on his part, right? And so I said, "No, I don't." He said, "Would you like to?" And I said, "Sure." And we literally were holding hands. And for 5 or 10 seconds, I'm looking around and then the next thing I know, it's like, it was just, I resonated his voice and it was beautiful. And I accepted Christ in that moment.
Mm.
And Scott had looked over and said, by the way, Rosie ended the conversation. He goes, "Who brought you here today?" And I said, "Scott Linton." He goes, "I want you to talk to Scott. I know Scott. Because I want you to get him to study with him. I want you to study the book of John. Do you have a Bible?" I said, "Nope." He said, "Ask Scott for a Bible." I went over to Scott's table. He said, "What was that all about?" I repeated the story that I just told you. He just chuckled and said, "That's beautiful." A couple hours later, Mike McFarland delivers, and Mike's no longer with us, a Bible to
Mhm.
my office. Um, A couple days later, Scott and I started studying. It was just me and him, and then we got four, five, six people, and we started studying the Book of John, and
Mm.
um, October '98. I got to tell you one other hook to that story is I got back in the car, I called Amy up. Now, before I tell you the conversation what I had with Amy, is that we had four or five different people in the years leading up to that had approached me and Amy regarding them wanting to share their testimony. A dear friend of mine, Bob Nozzle, is no longer with us. Him and his wife shared their testimony with us. Um, my sister Amy at my 40th birthday party came to we were walking on the beach. They had come from Cleveland. We were walking on the beach in Del Mar. She proceeded to tell me that her and Jeff had accepted Jesus.
Wow.
And my response to her, I don't remember my exact words, but I remember was like, she might have well been told me that they ordered a cheeseburger for lunch. It like it didn't mean anything to me. And so having said that, what I didn't know was that Amy had been approached by Cindy and my sister Amy to, they had similar conversations. So anyhow, that summer, Amy went back to Cleveland and drove to Pittsburgh to a Women of Faith conference and accepted Jesus in her life. She came back and she told me about it.
Mm.
So when I got out of the meeting with Rosie, if it was making sense, let me know. If it's not making sense, let me know. Excuse me. By the way, at some point in time, I want to tell people that are listening to this conversation why sometimes my speech is a little choppy, although I feel I'm pretty good this morning. But I called her up. I said, honey, I just left this meeting with Scott Linton and I accepted Jesus in my life, and we got to sit down and talk to you about accepting the Lord. And she was like silent. She goes, honey, I did that this summer. So she had come back from that conference and told me about it. And
Wow.
I had such, the scales on my eyes and my ears, the wall was up. Like, how, like what a knucklehead I am. My wife shares this story with me. I don't even remember it. And so it was just like, but to me, that's all part of the beauty of God's tapestry is like, that's part of my story. Like I was a pure knucklehead. Even when I had stopped drinking, I was still like, I was a knucklehead. I don't know what other word to use, but that was my MO. And so we basically started this journey together. Um, we had Cal, and Carter was a couple months old. Yeah, no, Carter was 6 or 7 months old then, and the kind of the rest is history as it relates to our walk. I could dive a little bit deeper if you wanted me to, but that's where I was saved.
That's an incredible story, Robbie. I guess the question I have is again, it's one of legacy, but accepting Christ, which you did, thanks to Scott and Rosie Greer, is still there's a transition there. There's the uh, intellectual aspect, there's the emotional aspect. Underlying this, you talked about the fear of death. Uh, the application of one's faith has always been fascinating to me. Fascinating isn't exactly the right word, but it speaks to Frank Schaeffer's book that's entitled How Then Shall We Live? In other words, having faith is one aspect of a person's identity. The difficult part is actually applying the aspects of faith, loving your enemy, uh, all of the fruits of the Holy Spirit aspect, dealing with your fears and this sort of thing. How are the coming years, succeeding years after you accepted Jesus? How did you handle those difficulties? How did you see fear of death from that perspective? How did you handle conflict with people that you maybe had conflict with? How did you actually apply your faith?
Oh, Ron, that's a great question. It's first of all, it's something it's an ongoing lesson we all learn. I would say now as a as again a almost 69-year-old guy that's been a believer now for gosh 30 some years. 30 anyhow. It's always it's a process, isn't it? And so I would
Yes.
say early on it was a lot of conversations with Scott, lots of conversations with guys that I got into studies with, couples studies, hosting couple studies. But just the application comes into literally getting on your hands and knees in the morning, asking for help, admitting to that you can't do it yourself, right?
Hmm. How did how did your community or your relationship, shall we say, um, did that change? In other words, did you go all in where all you had were fellow believers, or was there some relationships where they were kind of like you when after Amy had told you and you didn't have eyes to see or ears to hear? How did that change, if anything?
So I'm changing rooms again. I apologize. I'm blessed. I live near a golf course, and there was a couple of guys golfing that were a little bit salty with some of the language. Speaking of anyhow, I would um that was probably the most difficult thing was is I hung with a group of guys that I'm still buddies with some of them today, but they were doing things and activities that I just didn't want to be a part of. So that was probably the most difficult thing to kind of to stay away from. But probably the toughest one was is the production group I was in at my at work, which was really a partnership. Um, that was the toughest thing to navigate because there wasn't acceptance on their part of the decision I made. Not an like they were fine with whatever I wanted to do, but there was almost a like and again, not shame, just it was clumsy, let's just say that. So I learned the lesson of like I still had to love these guys, I still had to do my job, and it was really good because it allowed me to um as we know, as we, whether it's your neighbor or coworker, just just anybody in your community, and not everybody is going to walk and live their life exactly as you do. So how do you set an example? How do you witness to them without, it's the old velvet hammer, right? Do I poke them in the chest and beat them over the head, or just love them and give them the fragrance of Christ and walk the walk and hope they see it and just live your life? So as a Christian, so I would say that was um, it's probably the best way I could explain it at this point in time, bud. Starting to struggle a little bit with some of my words flowing out of my my tongue-tied mouth at this point in time.
Well, some people are meant to evangelize, but I think the way you describe Scott's approach is kind of the approach I personally have. I'm not that kind of a person. Some people are, and I'm we all have to have our own styles. But going back to um, the question of fear and fear of
Yeah.
death, and specifically, how have you, well, fear of death is just one fear. Have you, how have you dealt with that specific fear? Is that something that you spend any time thinking about or not? And what about other fears?
So that's an easy one for me to answer. So first of all, today I don't like I joke a lot about the fact that I have, and I'm going to go back to Scott here in a second. I have assurance in my life today what's going to happen when I die. I'm not afraid of that at all. But I joke about the fact that I want some control over how I die. Like I don't want to die in a plane crash. I don't want a steel eye beam piercing through the side of my head on the roller coaster ride. I joke about that, but um, I know where I'm going to go when I die, and again, it's the word assurance. And I want to tell you, I probably exhausted the heck out of Scotland. God bless him, because he was the first person that talked to me about the assurance. And he would use the example, hey, listen, we get on an airplane today, we fly to Detroit, Michigan. We have assurance that we're going to get there when we get on the plane. Well, he uses that as his analogy that, because what Jesus has told us, and particularly in the third chapter of John, and that is that, if we accept him, that we accept Jesus, that we'll spend eternity in heaven with our Father God. And so I believe that to be true today. I don't want to get into, but no, I do want to get into it. But I'm struggling with kind of articulating this. But so I would say that Scott helped me over that fear. Some of the other fears, as I'm trying to, I guess the other fear I dealt with is the fear of financial failure, and some of those things of like the Lord took me through some interesting lessons that and mistakes that I made in some of my career decisions. But we Amy and I collectively, battled through that, and we've come through the other side, and we're doing fine financially. But that's not, gosh, I don't even, I almost, do me a favor when you add it, take that piece out, because I don't want this to be like a prosperity issue at all. But
No, that again, I would encourage you, Robbie, not to filter your own self out and let your heart speak,
I
because
appreciate that.
at the end of the day, that's there's a Japanese uh, concept of dealing with pottery. I don't know if you've seen it's called wabi-sabi as opposed to wasabi. Wasabi, of course, is with sushi, but I think it's wabi-sabi. It's where you have a bowl that's they actually you can do it accidentally where you break the bowl by accident. Either you drop it or whatever, or it's in a way it's done on purpose, but you take the broken bowl and you glue it back together with gold uh, uh, adhesive. And the bowl actually becomes more beautiful in its brokenness
Wow.
than it was originally made. And that's what's, in my mind, so unique about each of us as individuals, is we're all broken in our own way. And how we are fearfully and wonderfully put back together again by our faith, hope, and love, the Holy Spirit, makes us beautiful just the way we are. So you're frozen there, Robbie. I'm gonna
Yeah, I went into the bedroom for a minute, and the my internet signal is kind of a little off there. Hey, can you do me a favor? Can we stop for a second?
sure. Okay, Robbie. So here we are in the advent of your 69th birthday. So there's a couple things going on in your life. Would you want to share some of them?
Sure. From a health standpoint, I was diagnosed in August of 2020 with Parkinson's disease. And early on, I met a guy, and I'm going into detail who this guy is. If you want to know who he is, his name is Tom Howes. And he's a great guy, but he's um, he's an athlete, professional athlete. He has Parkinson's, and he used to say, I haven't talked to him in a while, is that um, you will not die from Parkinson's, but you will die with it. And how do you want to live the next 10, 15, 20 years of your life with it? And that was great encouragement when I was first diagnosed. So then what happened was in February of 2020, I was reading the senior night script for the boys soccer team at Santa Fe Christian, where I was the assistant athletic director there. And that was the last 11, 12 years of my career is what I did at Santa Fe Christian. And so I'm reading the senior night bios, if you will, and I was really struggling getting the words out. And it was like, and nobody really seemed to notice, but it was interesting because Amy came up to me later that evening when I got home, and Ronnie Ferrugi, who's a friend of ours, who was in the development, still is, department at Santa Fe, went to Amy and said, "Hey, Robbie was really choked up today about the senior soccer players." And Amy felt that was unusual because, for a couple of reasons, anyhow, I don't get into those. But she later that night, she said, "What's up?" I said, "Honey, it was really weird. I started to read the script, and I couldn't get the words out. It was like I was nervous, or I was choking up on the words, and I couldn't get them out."
Mm.
And it was the first thing that we knew. So then I had a couple other episodes like that. Next thing we know, COVID hits. I'm exercising a little bit more. I'm trying to stay in shape during COVID. I'm walking. And there was a couple other things that had occurred. And so finally I called the doctor. He I won't give you a blow by blow, but basically he says we need to go see a neurologist, and the neurologist confirmed that I had Parkinson's. And then even 6 to 8 weeks later, I finally got a DAT scan done, and it measures the dopamine levels in your brain. And I got Parkinson's. So that's August of 2020. And I'm talking a little bit about right now because I'm starting to struggle with this interview and discussion with Ron. Because what happens to me is I get tired as we start to reach the noon hour of the day, particularly if I haven't had a good night's sleep before the night before, I struggle with my speech and my delivery. A lot of people see Michael J. Fox with the moving motions of his arms, or a lot of people with tremors. I don't have those symptoms of Parkinson's. Probably the three biggest things I have are lethargy, but a friend of mine always reminds me that when you approach 70, everybody's lethargic or can be. But my right side is pretty rigid. It's hard for me to do anything from a movement standpoint. It's affected my coordination and my movement. And then the third thing is it seems to be attacking my ear, nose, and throat. My nose runs a lot. I tend to drool at times. It's not very pretty at times, but my speech is really affected adversely. I start to slow down. I lose strength and rhythm in my speech. And I sense that that's happening, coming on a little bit. And my wife lovingly says I tend to um, notice it before I actually delivering the slowness of my speech, but I just sometimes feel clumsy when I talk. That's probably the biggest challenge. Here's the good news is that I've got great doctors, I got great medication. I got a wife who, give me a second. Um, I don't know what I did to deserve her.
Mm.
Um, it just was, she's unbelievable with how she supports and loves me. and just helps me through the day with my physical ailments and has me eating right, has me cracking the whip when I eat too much sugar. I'm not supposed to eat any sugar, and but so the good news, I dropped about probably 50 pounds since I started this whole journey. Just
Mm,
primarily like not eating like an idiot and walking a couple times a day.
mm.
Somebody, I ran into a guy the other day. He doesn't know I have Parkinson's. He goes, he hadn't seen me in a while. He goes, man, you lost a lot of weight. What'd you do? I said, really radical diet. He says, what? Tell me about it. I said, I don't eat like an idiot and I walk 5 times a week. Because that's it. Yeah, that's it. So I'm trying to. Obviously, it's not that funny, but that's my attempt at humor. But so things are good. My kids are. I had the two most wonderful boys in the world and three of the cutest grandkids you'll ever want to meet. I got two daughter-in-laws. I got to talk about them for a second. Amy and I had two boys, and they're wonderful. But the two daughter-in-laws that the Lord has blessed me with, Laurel Hinson. She is so sweet. And this Kate Dunkel girl that's coming in my life is equal. It's just amazing, Ron. It's like I wake up every morning and I got this gratitude list. I got two or three of them I look at, and I got Laurel and Kate on each one of them, and it's like they're the most wonderful. And I know I'm getting mushy, and I'm not. My words aren't coming out properly, but I'm just so grateful that they're my daughter-in-laws. I actually like them more than my kids. I'm joking, but um, I'm just grateful for them. I'm grateful for my wife. I'm grateful for my doctors. I'm grateful for friends like you and Savas and Scott and Danny Mangione. And I got all these buddies. I got a buddy named Dave Lefton who's a knucklehead. He's a Jewish guy that I pray for all the time. We held hands. He sat next to me at my son's wedding, and we held hands when my buddy Don Underwood said the prayer. And Dave and I have really good discussions about our faith. Our politics are different. Our faiths are different. But I love him. And I could start naming names of the people that are in my life that I just don't deserve. And it's just, I'll tell you, I'm going to give you a couple of their shout outs. The people at Santa Fe Christian, I retired. I went on disability last November 1st. So I haven't been working now for 7 months. But the people at Santa Fe Christian, my bosses and coworkers, the HR director, Kristen Smith, the head of schools, Rod Gilbert, my direct boss in the athletic department, Doug Miller, Mike Siciliano, who's the upper school principal, John Wallace, who's the football coach, and my coworker is one of my assistant ADs, Chad Bickley. I mean, I go on and on and on. The people that God has put in my life, particularly through Santa Fe Christian, is just it's a miracle. These are the most wonderful people in the world, and I got to spend the last 10 years of my life with them, and I continue to get invited to different events and sporting events, and I still show up. John texted me this morning, wants to know if I want to be the assistant middle school golf coach next year. I'm going to do it. And I just found out that the head coach is going to be a young married woman whose father is a good friend of mine, Todd Durr, and hopefully Rory, his daughter, is going to be the golf coach, and I'm going to be her assistant, and I'm going to. She can do it with her eyes closed. But anyhow, I'm rambling now, and um, I appreciate you, buddy, a lot.
Robbie, let me just, I'm sensitive to your energy level as we spoke about. So I want to close with this saying that I've heard that has been kind
Mm,
of a mantra. I think I mentioned it to you before when
yes.
we spoke, but blessed are those that plant seed for trees under whose shade they'll never sit.
Mm,
And I think it's a motivation for me as I've gotten older, and it sounds like as you're reaching the ripe old age of 69, that there will be people whose uh, you have planted seeds for trees under whose shade you'll never sit, will never sit. And your gratitude comments, I'm sure, will be meaningful for them. And so let's uh, finish this up, and then we can always have a part two. And I'm going to be talking to Carter later, and maybe we can have a joint conversation between you and whomever you'd like to have as part of your legacy. So thank you, Robbie, for your vulnerability, your transparency, your courage for all the things that you've gone through in the past and the present and in the future.
Thanks, buddy. I love you. You know that, right?
Talk to you later.
Bye bye.